All right, and it is now just about 29 minutes after 6. Time for us to look at the dailies this morning and see what's making headlines. And joining me to have that conversation, we have Dr. Sam Kamau and William Okech. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us bright and early to take a look at this. And as usual, we're going to start off with the Standard, where we have the headlines as members of Parliament devise new ways to extort and make money. So, of course, many Kenyans would be very disappointed with this. Let me start with you, William Okech, on some of these devices. Or maybe before we do that, because on the headlines, I see, let me start with good news.
Oh, yes.
Because we have we have a tendency of looking at the news that doesn't augur very well with Kenyans. But let me start with good news. And of course, we do know by now that Eliud Kipchoge and Vivian Cheruiyot were winners of the London Marathon, which was very good news. We do know that Uhuru Kenyatta was there not too long ago, so that must have been a good end to his tour.
Oh, yes. I think that was a very proud moment, coming at the backdrop of Kenya not having won in any marathon at the Gold Coast Olympic Games.
In Australia.
So, yes. So Kipchoge and Cheruiyot winning gold, I think that's a double, and it's a proud moment. Putting us again up on the map there, and we should just all say congratulations.
Absolutely.
to both.
Dr. Samini, your congratulations to the team.
Of course, I was very excited, watching the race. In fact, I think it should be given even more prominence.
It should have been maybe the headlines on the...
You should have seen what Britain did with Mo Farah. It's like he's the one
and he
who
was
won,
number 3.
Yes, because he broke, the British record. So I think, I know we tried, but we should celebrate our athletes more.
Absolutely. All right, now moving on to the headlines, and members of Parliament devise new ways to extort and make money. This is by having parallel committees, but maybe we can just explain further so that we fully understand how this is happening.
Oh, yes, exactly. Parliament has some certain powers given to it by the Constitution of Kenya, and that includes legislating and oversight. In terms of oversight, the powers of Parliament to oversight, we have the National Assembly and the Senate. Both have different roles and functions. And there is one critical element of petition, where any member of the public has an issue, they can petition Parliament. And Parliament normally works by committee. Traditionally, most parliaments across the world will work by committee. So you find that in certain instances, issues come up that affect public interest. More in point, these issues which mostly involve a lot of money, such as the issue of the Roraka land allocation. So you'll find that parliamentary committees will try to have an investigative role, trying to summon the people who are involved in those sagas and trying to generate some reports. But here now comes the problem. You'll find that over time, because I think this is a study which has been done, there is a unique speciality only given to matters which seem to have a lot of money involved, matters which have special interests, and yet at the heart of it, you find that if there are two parallel investigations going on by the National Assembly and Senate, both will be expending money, taxpayers' money. So at the end of the day, you'll find that 2 reports will be generated, and after the long and short of it, nothing much will really happen, but money has been wasted. There's no good value for money.
That with sitting allowances and all that, Dr. Kamau?
Actually, there is a second issue which is even more worrying. Like my colleague has mentioned here, they tend to focus on, of course, on probes that, where huge sums of money are involved. But there is also a potential in a country where lobbying has not been properly institutionalized. It opens doors now for opportunities for kickbacks, and people, who are mentioned or involved at the center of the probe, they get an opportunity now, of course, to try and influence the reports of the different committees. And I think the parallel probes, at times when you see it happening in the Senate and the National Assembly, there are always attempts behind the scenes, and that is why you see even after they have perhaps concluded the investigations, they take a bit of time, to release the report, and these are now opportunities, because like I've said, we have not properly institutionalized, lobbying, so that
actually
now
lobbying in Kenya basically means there's an exchange of monies under the table.
Yeah, that is what, because we've never found a way of professionalizing an institution, because there is an opportunity for that. But now why this is worrying is because it's an opportunity now for corruption because if you remember the previous parliament, the watchdog committee, and I think also the agriculture committee, there were allegations that, the members of the committee had received or had been induced to either try to cover up or remove some names from the reports and all that. So that is actually the worrying thing in this particular issue, besides also the fact that it's also a waste of taxpayers' money when you're duplicating processes. And in the end, like my colleague mentioned, nothing much comes out of it.
A question here would be then to Kenyans, how do we deal with our members of parliament? Because if it is not an increase in salary, then it is sitting in committees that they earn allowances, that possibly one is left wondering what really they're doing other than just earning money.
Yeah, I think the issue here, there's a critical issue of how do we then perceive public service. For a very long time, there has been this impression which has been ingrained that in Kenya, when you want to get rich very quickly, get into politics. So I think that misconception is at the root of it.
Currently it's not a misconception. It seems like it's a fact.
It seems like it's a fact, which is quite worrying.
It's a reality. It's not meant to be, but it seems like it's a fact.
Yes, and it's quite worrying. You even find that when you go deep in the story, a member of one of those committees goes on record and even makes confessions that in the previous Public Accounts Committee, they even had to do a coup. They ejected out the chairperson and some members who had allegedly taken some bribes. So I think the solution for this issue will be, one, we need a paradigm shift. How do we perceive public service? And then also there is the other flip side issue of payment of salaries. People really ought to be comfortable with some salaries. A survey was done, and Kenya in the region pays their members of parliament quite high, quite high.
All right, and I guess amongst the highest in the world.
Yes.
Dr. Kamau, maybe just a few tips on how we can tame these bad manners.
Okay.
If at all we can.
In terms of duplication of roles and running parallel, investigations, I think this one is just a clarification of roles. You remember, it's not been very clear, where the mandate of, for example, National Assembly ends, or rather Senate, especially Senate, where it ends and where the one of National Assembly ends. And what we have seen is that whenever the National Assembly will do something, Senate will say that one touches on the counties, even when they are stretching it a little bit too much, so that they do not see themselves as one parliament as envisaged. So I think part of it would be a clarification of those roles in terms of the number of times that the MPs decide to sit, perhaps in terms of the standing orders, and also a clarification. And I think there was an attempt through the Saraserem, commission to try and cap, the maximum number of allowances, if that is the only motivation. The other thing, like I said, would be now to tighten the controls. Right. Part of it will be to institutionalize and professionalize lobbying, so that it locks out now, that undue influence that, involves kickbacks and all that. But I think at the end of it, the one area where we have failed seriously is Chapter 6 in terms of integrity. We have tried that, we've talked about it, but we don't seem to be making headway on that.
Constitution, but doesn't seem to be working for us.
Exactly.
And I don't know how we're going to do this. Again, I think it boils down to our individual values as individuals, because it looks like once we have a position of power, then we influence things to suit ourselves in a very selfish manner.
Yes.
It doesn't really help.
Oh, yes, exactly. So just like he has mentioned, we have Chapter 6. But then you find that Parliament, normally when they legislate or pass laws, they tend to claw back some of those provisions. And a question is pointed to the Leadership and Integrity Act, which was meant to actually fulfill that chapter. But then you find that when it comes to enforcement, Parliament will pass really very weak laws that now even defeats the main purpose of what was intended.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to other stories in the Standard. Let's look at page 8. And this is mainly highlighting on the devolution conference that begins today. Yeah. And gentlemen, let me start with you, Dr. Kamau, on your expectation of the devolution conference. Previously, we've had a number of them. And it seems to me like governors, of course, as is expected, will put their best foot forward and give us this glamour and, a good show of what has been happening in the counties. However, whether that reflects the true reality on the ground is a debatable affair.
Mike, I think in as much as we have had certain challenges with devolution, I think we've made quite some considerable progress. Yesterday, I was happy with the editorial in the Sunday Standard, where I tried to take stock, in terms of things that have happened at the county level. Because I think for the longest time, the big stories from the counties is in terms of wastage, benchmarking, trips and all that. But I think there has been some significant impact on the ground. We, of course, still have the challenges in terms of the resources that are getting to counties, in terms of devolution of certain functions, in terms of wastage and corruption at the counties. But I think these, for me, 5 years later, and we've devolved over, I think, about 1.2 trillion. We have started seeing certain changes in terms of the health centers, and actually that is one of the things I think the editorial yesterday captured. There have been about 10,000 dispensaries across the counties. In terms of ECD, institutions that have also been put in place. So there has been progress, and I think devolution should be strengthened despite the criticism that has been there. I actually laud the process, and I believe with time we'll see the fruits. The last thing maybe I would want to say is that it also comes at a moment after the handshake, where now it seems that the governors are not exactly running a parallel, system. The competition may have reduced, and therefore perhaps the focus in terms of the big issues that the government wants to focus on in terms of the big four. Perhaps these will be at the center of the discussions at the devolution conference.
We hope that's going to happen. William Okech, your thoughts on the devolution conference and possibly the progress we have made as a country in 5 years?
Quite so. There have been success stories. Devolution was something that was at the very heart of the clamor for the new constitution. Kenyans for a very long time had complained that a centralized executive had stifled development in areas which were hitherto perceived to be opposition areas. Therefore, when the new constitution came in, devolution in chapter 10 of the new constitution was one of those pillars which was hoped to steer the country to attain Vision 2030. So there have been success stories, but my expectations will be when those leaders gather in Kakamega today, they really ought to be very honest with themselves and say, fine, we have been able to make some certain progresses, but there have been challenges. Topmost of those challenges was the issue of corruption and management of resources, very critical. And I think they should really just be honest. When the king is naked, they should really be able to stand up and say, here, we have failed. So the idea of devolution in itself has not failed, but certain county governments may have failed in one aspect or another.
And of course, challenges that they have faced, and some of those to highlight possibly is like the health sector, which we have had quite a rocky relationship between the providers of health and the county governments. But that's a discussion that we're also going to have right here on The Way It Is. We'll see whether we can also catch up with a few governors as they assemble in Kakamega County to kickstart the devolution conference that begins today. Today's registration, but we'll see whether we can catch up with them later on right here on Morning Express, so do stay with us. Let's now look at page 12. And this is a matter of concern with the heavy rains that we have had. There's been quite a number of casualties, deaths, loss of property, and according to the weatherman, I think we're still waiting for another maybe few days of torrential rain, and we know some of the roads have been cut off. We've had bridges literally being washed away. We've had people die, and just generally looking at a disaster that we kind of saw coming, because the weatherman did warn that this was going to happen, but somehow we never seem to be prepared.
Exactly so. In our style and fashion, there's always been this issue of a disaster happens. There is all manner of public outrage and outcry, especially the issue of floods, perennial floods, blockage of sewer systems, stoppage of public transport. But then you find that certain agencies which have been tasked with the responsibility of intervening, they do not act. We do have a department under the special programs in the Ministry of Interior that ought to be coordinating all these issues. But then Kenyans have had this resort to stopgap measures. Something happens, we don't plan in the long run, we only look in the short run. And when the full cycle comes again, we find ourselves in the same issue. One case in point, the issue of floods and public sewers which do not work. It rains, People talk about it, but nothing happens. You don't see any adjustments being made. You don't see the public works people trying to even unclog those systems. So I think issues of enforcement and those agencies which are responsible have been failing.
All right, Dr.
Yeah.
Kamau.
Maybe the one observation I want to make, of course, remember the other day we were crying about drought and, we didn't have rains, and now all of a sudden it's rains and floods. The biggest failure we have seen is in our inability to use the data that we have, because it's something that happens every year. We know the trouble spots, and there are certain measures we can put in place, because the stopgap measures, like in fact, you can just look at the city right now. Most of the major roads, especially the smaller roads, they have been affected or destroyed by the rains. And what we'll do is that you see a few efforts here and there to try and cover some of the potholes, but never really planning. So we know that every time we have the long rains, when there is a massive downpour, these issues will always happen. And for me, it is, if we can use the data, because we have that information, the government always collects data that we can actually use to address some of the big issues. You remember the issue of, Naivasha and, Narok? Those are trouble spots, so to speak, and they're always prone. And we know what are some of the factors that would cause this. But as usual, and like he said, yes, there's even a fund, and a special program. Right. But now the stopgap measures, the temporary measures, do not really help us address this issue long term. So as soon as we are done with floods, now we'll go back to, drought, famine. The dams are not full, and people now need relief food. Well, there is much more that we would have done about this. I'm not sure how we don't always think long term.
And that really speaks to our leadership and the kind of leadership that we have, really, because why we put leaders where they are is, one, to give us direction, and two, they should be visionary. There should be somebody who's there to try and give us a solution as to how we can sort this once and for all, because like you've mentioned, some of the trouble spots are known. They're recurrent. They happen time and again. It could be out of because maybe we've built where we're not supposed to build, and as a result, the floods are basically gather up and destroy. But it speaks to our leadership. William?
Oh, yes, quite so. You'll even find that certain leaders, whenever they get into office, be it MPs, be it MCs, there's a legislative requirement that these leaders, they need to be in constant communication with those whom they represent. And then there's also the aspect of public participation. People really need to be sensitized. Issues of are people informed about emergency procedures? Are people informed of how to take care of themselves first? We've had a very famous saying in the past that safety begins with you first. So if you find a situation whereby someone is not informed, someone is out of touch with those whom they lead, and they don't even see those whom they elected, then you find that there are those gaps. And within those gaps, then, it is possible for people to have misplaced priorities all over.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The thing I want to chip in there is, I think our obsession with politics, which now makes us think in terms of 5-year cycles, I think is part of the problem. Because some institutions, when you talk about KENHA, that will take care of, the major roads and the major bridges, especially the roads that are connecting Kenya and other countries, and also connecting county to county headquarters. The Kainuk Bridge has been an issue all through, and in fact, last night, again, we saw it's still there. This does not exactly depend on, the government in place or even the county government. Kenya has the mandate, can seek the support of the government. So in terms of looking at how to dissociate, distance, disconnect the politics and our electoral cycle and development, so that you're able to address some of these issues long term. I agree, for example, the issues facing Nairobi, they will require actually, there is a long-term plan. There's what we need to fix in the now, but I think there is a long-term in terms of putting things in place. Part of Vision 2030, where they, project where they were to identify certain major projects that can be done over a period of time. That longevity is very important in how we plan things, instead of just thinking, what can we do right now that will help us get votes in the next 2 or 3 years? That is part of the problem.
All right, and I guess the electorate is watching. Hopefully we are learning, and we'll have lessons that we can put it into place in 2022. Let's now take a look at the nation. where we have the headlines as rot in the city. You've brought up Nairobi, Dr. Kamau, and, well, Mike Sonko and Polycarp Igathe, then who was the running mate, came in with this promise that they were going to sort out Nairobi within 100 days. And one of the things, or maybe to mention some of the things they had promised they'll sort out, one was traffic, which has not happened, and the second was garbage. And, well, they say, I read somewhere that if you have a leader who does not know what to do with garbage, then you need to know that they are garbage. Well, I don't know whether you agree or ascribe to that, but there you go.
Yes, I will only be able to say this. I would love to ascribe to one theory in management that says, if you find yourself that you are flogging a dead horse, then the only viable thing is for you to unmount that horse and to get onto another horse. Mm-hmm. You don't set up a committee to investigate why this horse is dead. You don't appoint experts to do that. So in terms of matters Nairobi, I think for a very long time, we've been held back by inertia. Committees have been set up, probes have been set up. We even had the master plan, the Nairobi we want. But then fixing Nairobi takes much more than a campaign manifesto. Mm-hmm. It takes much more than PR and publicity. So I think here critical leadership is very important. And a leadership that will be able to make decisions and a leadership that will be able to bite the bullets. Do an assessment. Know what are the priority areas that we need. If it's in terms of managing public transport, then you really need to look at international best practices. Singapore have a very nice public transport system. Right here in East Africa, we have Tanzania, which launched a mass transport system at a very, very cheaper cost. So I think in terms of leadership that is able to bite the bullet, that is lacking. Because you'll find that certain vested interest within the police, within even the management of the city, they also have business interests in the transport sector. That now makes it hard for you to make a decision in public interest. The decisions you'll make will be more or less in profit interest.
All right, Dr. Kamau.
The current governor for Nairobi ran with a slogan, "Let's fix Nairobi."
Right. Yes.
I think that was an acknowledgement that Nairobi has issues that need to be fixed. The road. And what is interesting is that in terms of choice of governor, Kidero, you know, from 2013, we would say it was one side of the pendulum. We wanted to try somebody who has managerial experience, who can, you know, Nairobi needed a leader, not a politician. That didn't work for us. And therefore, we decided now to swing the pendulum to the other extreme end. Let's, you know, get somebody we think is in touch with the people and with the ground. And disappointment, I think I'm looking at the word here, disappointment and despondency.
Absolutely.
Because, and in my opinion, yes, there is a master plan. There are all those big plans that Kidero used to talk about. But I kept saying, in terms of just the small things, fixing the garbage, you know, that is a small thing. In terms of dealing with the street children that invaded the city, you know, under Kidero, there are very small things that I thought when Sonko comes in,
small wins
that you can do before we talk about the big ones. But unfortunately, what we keep seeing is, you know, constant reshuffles, instability within the government, you know, the county government, the deputy governor resigned. That has not been sorted out. A bit of infighting, a bit of, you know, almost a year later, they're yet to settle in the office. But of course, the other day we heard that there is a renewal origination program for Nairobi, because actually the other thing, Nairobi being the capital, you know, of Kenya, would require also the input and cooperation of the national government. This is a good initiative, but like I said, small wins, because right now drainage is clogged, garbage is all over, the hawkers menace
is still as bad as it was.
Exactly, and I think it's time the current governor decide, yeah, there's a populist politics that can help you get the votes, but at the end of 4.5 years, because I mean, at the end of 4 years, Nairobi residents want services delivered to them, and I can tell you there is also a growing sense of regret, even among the voters who voted for the current governor, in terms of his ability to deliver. There is that fear that this man cannot fix.
He may not be able to fix that. All right, I want us to wind up with a Star, where we have the headline as Akombe exposes the rot inside IEBC, and of course, that is a story that is developing, and we're waiting to see what will happen with the IEBC. As we wind up, William, your comments on IEBC very briefly.
Yes, an electoral managed body in any country, not just Kenya, has to inspire confidence. Confidence not just from the political parties who are competing, but confidence from the members of the public, from the citizens who will take part in that electoral process. Where you find that an electoral body has been hit by divisions, it has been hit by resignations, then the only other viable thing is for that commission to be reconstituted, for a new process, an inclusive process of coming up with a commission that inspires public confidence should be initiated. That is a critical thing.
As we wind up,
I think it is clear that the current IEBC, to agree with him, does not inspire confidence. Partly, of course, is to be blamed on how we set it up in a hurry to, because of the 2017 elections. But I think we have an opportunity right now. It is a fact that even if Chebukati is still holding on, to the seat and the other two commissioners, their fate is sealed. But you have a perfect opportunity to put another commission in place, at least way ahead of the next elections, and try and stabilize the things. But in terms of, ABC is dysfunctional, the chairman doesn't seem to inspire confidence, incompetence, and the issues that Akombe is exposing, I think they are fate is sealed.
There's a problem.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Sam Kamau and William Okech, for joining us this morning to go through the dailies. And, well, this is where we wind up this segment of the show. And at this point, we'd like to say goodbye to our KTN home viewers. Life and Style is just about to begin. On KTN News, do stay with us. We'll take a short break. When we come back, let's look at some of the stories making headlines, but also the Devolution Conference begins today. And has devolution worked for you? That's a question that we're going to be posing. And